yeah, let's crack on.
Perfect. When you were growing up, did motorsport play a big role in your first few years and your brother's lives, or was it a bit later when you were a sort of teenager that you got into motorsport?
Well, we went to the Grand Prix as kids, which I have very vague memories of, and then there was absolutely nothing until I was 18. I grew up, in the countryside, riding horses, and playing polo. I knew absolutely nothing about cars, had no interest in them. Well, I started getting an interest in driving once I got my scooter license when I was 16. And I always liked, we grew up, had sort of motorbikes and stuff, mucking around, on friends' farms and stuff like that. But I knew absolutely nothing about motorsport when I started. It was just the off chance I was invited to the Festival Speed, and offered a go in a racing car. So that's how it all began, really. So I came into the sport completely green, with knowing absolutely nothing.
And up to that point, did you realise how important your father was to motor racing fans and indeed Formula One more generally?
Not at all. No. I mean, I knew he was a world champion. But I didn't realise the sort of the gravity of it until my first season in Formula Ford in 2007, and I think that was one of the reasons I didn't. I struggled from the mental side of driving, because suddenly, having never seen a camera in my life, I had dozens pointed at me and journalists all over me and everything. So then it sort of, I realised just how loved Dad was, and also, I ended up putting a lot of pressure on myself to meet expectations, but which didn't help. So yeah.
And so you started in that was Formula Ford, and how have you progressed since then? I know last year was a particularly good season for you. I think you had a couple of wins in Aston Martin, obviously doing sort of GT racing. How have you sort of progressed through the ranks of racing?
With difficulty, I say, if I'm honest. There's been a lot of underfunded seasons. I mean, in my whole career, I've only really done sort of 2 or 3, not even that, full seasons, sort of 2 full seasons, really. And then it's just been one-off drives here and there. Some with success, some without success. I've been driving better recently. In the last few years, I've managed to get my head together a lot better, because it really is a very mental sport. If your head's not there, you're not in the right place, you're not going to be able to perform. But I've got that under, sort of more or less under control now, I think, and have been delivering better results. So yeah, it's been in GTs recently, and prototypes. The LMP3 I've been driving. That's what I would be driving in Roads to Le Mans this year. I raced Roads to Le Mans last year in the LMP3, and we did a V2V race as well in Estoril end of last year or the year before, I think. I can't remember. Which was all right. So yeah, I think that's what I'm concentrating on now is prototypes with the idea to get to Le Mans. But funding is difficult, and now with coronavirus, it's just going to make it a whole lot more difficult. So to be honest, I really don't know. The future's looking pretty uncertain for me as a racing driver right now.
Well, I imagine you're not the only one. I think it doesn't matter if you're a racing driver or any sort of business or industry you work in, it's pretty uncertain at the moment. But I think hopefully it will bounce back. And certainly, I obviously race classic cars, and and I'm just can't wait to get back on the track. And I think that's what hopefully a lot of people will think, and hopefully the sponsors will think as well. So interesting. And going back to Le Mans, obviously it sounds like your aspirations are not in Formula One. They're really around GT racing, and it sounds like Le Mans is your ultimate ambition. I've been quite lucky in that I've raced at Le Mans 5 times in historic stuff, obviously not modern racing. And so it's a pretty special track. But maybe just tell us why Le Mans is so revered and why it's such a special target for you to try and win that race and obviously compete in that.
Well, obviously it's the most prestigious of all the endurance races around the world. Le Mans is it's a hell of a circuit. It really is. And I know one of the questions in this is, what's my favourite circuit? And that is Le Mans.
Yeah.
Nice, long straights, fast corners, also slow corners for overtaking opportunities. So yeah, no, it's a hell of a circuit. I don't know where the bloody dog goes there. yeah, and endurance, any 24-hour race is tough work. But Le Mans, obviously, that little bit more. You've got, well, I'm not really sure why, to be honest, but Le Mans is the pinnacle of endurance racing, so that's what I want to go for.
Yeah. So, I think it's on my bucket list. I think you're a lot closer to ever achieving it than I will ever be. But it's pretty special. I remember a few years ago racing my Corvette there in the Le Mans Classic, and at 4 a.m. when the sun was rising and I was going down about 150 miles per hour down the Mulsanne Straight and going into Indianapolis and so on, I was like, wow, this is a pretty special place. We've got the trees either side of you. I don't think there's any circuits. Maybe Spa to a degree, you get that sense, but it's pretty incredible place.
Yeah, I've not driven Spa yet, unfortunately. I look forward to it. Yeah, very much looking forward to it. It is a very special place. I had a bit of a scare there. Luckily, it was in practice, so I could lift off. But it was coming back. I'm not sure if it's a Mulsanne Straight, but once you get to the end of it, you do that hairpin, and you head back towards the grandstands. So it's heading west. And it was sort of 8:30 in the evening with the sun right in my eyes, and I had oil on my windscreen. I couldn't see a bloody thing. And luckily that was in a practice I could lift off. But in a race, you've got to keep flat and hope there's nothing in front of you, because you I literally couldn't see anything. So that was quite, you're doing 100, and I was probably doing 160, 170 miles an hour at the time. So yeah, I mean the guys that did it in the old days before carbon fibre and before they put those chicanes in, that's taken some serious balls. That speed, even if you or the other drivers don't do anything wrong, anything, a puncture or anything like that can kill you. So any mechanical failure, so yeah, I take my hat off to those guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. In our interview with Lord Hesketh last week, he actually said that for him, the difference between a good driver and a great driver are people that in those sort of situations, they put their foot down and they commit. And he talked specifically about your father's first win in the Hesketh at the International Trophy race at Silverstone in 1974. And obviously, as you know, Freddie, your father qualified on pole position, but then dropped back, I think, due to clutch slip. And not only that, the gear stick actually fell off in his hand during the race. But he managed to claw his way back, and I think he then has an unbelievable battle with Ronnie Peterson and got past him going into Woodcut with one of the most committed overtakes. That's certainly not an easy place to overtake. And it was those moments, I think, that just, you can see someone that's got the commitment. And do you think that makes the difference between, as I said, a good driver and a great driver, that level of commitment when it really matters?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it can, one place here and there, it only takes one time in a season to gain that extra place, to gain that extra point, which could be the difference between second and first place. Rather than sitting behind and collecting second position or whatever the points for whatever position you're in. So yes, absolutely, but it's not the only difference between a great driver and a good driver and a great driver, but it is key. And we see some of the drivers now. I mean, what's his name? The young Dutch fella, Verstappen. I mean, he's got some balls, and he does some pretty spectacular maneuvers. But you've got to be able to pull them off as well. I've tried a few, and there's some that work, some haven't.
Yeah, I think your father would probably say the same thing. I guess they didn't always go his way.
No, exactly. But yeah, obviously a lot very different in those days without all the protection.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what you mentioned earlier on about being in the right mental state for racing and how it has a big impact on your performance. Your father, obviously, before races, he was often very tense, anxious, and I think there's reports that he was even sick before some of his races from nerves. Do you think that was? Do you think he had those nerves when he actually got into the car, or was it just the preparation?
Well, as far as I'm aware, his being sick, that reputation came from much earlier on in racing when it was more nerves of if he crashes the car, that's it, game over. He couldn't afford to replace it. He couldn't, and he was still paying it off. He bought his first Formula Ford sort of with a loan, and I think the knowledge that if he was to damage it, then he couldn't continue. That couple, I imagine there was fear for his own health as well. So the combination of it made tremendous nerve. And getting out of racing in those days. I mean, Jackie told me something yesterday when I interviewed Jackie Stewart yesterday. It was after Jackie retired, and it was Dad. I think this is in '79. Dad had a tangle, and he was walking back. And Jackie rushed ahead to try and get hold of him for interview before anyone else could. And he said Dad was in a complete state of sort of adrenaline, fueled, sort of anxious mess, really. And I think he drives a lot. He was driving on adrenaline all the time.
Yeah.
He said several times that he was scared. But once you get in the car, you've got to put those fears aside. You decide whether you're going to race or not. If you decide to race, then you've got to put those fears aside. But I think the way he dealt with that was with tremendous amounts of adrenaline. I think I had that too. Well, I mean, I now know that my brain was flooded with adrenaline, too much of it for years. Explains a lot of my sort of craziness growing up, but I've got that sorted out now. So maybe Dad had that as well, extra adrenaline, more than average,
Yeah. I guess it makes it incredibly exciting. I remember seeing the footage. I can't remember which year it was. I think it was 70. Well, it was obviously in the Hesketh time, 74, 75 at Monaco, when he's having a battle and he gets pushed off and goes into the Armco, and the marshals are trying to get him off the track, and he waits a whole lap so he can shake his fist at.
Yeah.
Whoever it's brilliant. I think, one of the marshals tries to get him off the track. I think almost takes a swing at him. So
Well, he did see the raw passion. I think at Monza, he accidentally lashed out and then was obviously quick to apologise and help him back up onto his feet. Quite funny.
Yeah, but you can see there's no lacking of passion in those moments.
No, absolutely no. There was never any lack of passion with that. And I think that was. It was one of the many things people loved about him was he was so sort of colourful and passionate and a naughty boy, but yet so innocent. And I think that's how he got away with it, because people liked him for what he was, and he was a nonconformist through and through. And I think as long as he didn't rock the boat too much, I think he was he got away with it, and that was one of the things that made him so popular.
Yeah. I guess his most famous year is obviously 1976 with McLaren, where he ended up winning the World Championship, and the whole story around Nicky, and it's a remarkable story. But before we get to that, one of the periods that I absolutely love is the Hesketh story, and obviously we interviewed Lord Hesketh, who talked about obviously your father, and you couldn't have said nicer things about your father, held him in the most enormous esteem, and rightly so. But it just seemed back in those days, going from Formula 3 briefly into Formula 2 and then straight into Formula 1 in a year. Lord Hesketh was 22 at the time. Your father, I think, was 25. It must have been an unbelievable few years, incredibly exciting. They obviously partied pretty hard, but at the same time, they performed incredibly well on track. And Hesketh, obviously, with your father, obviously getting the win at Zandvoort, the Dutch Grand Prix in '75, and coming fourth in the Constructors' Championship. But actually, if you look at the technical data, he could have actually won so many more Grand Prix, despite the fact that Hesketh was probably one of the lower funded teams and definitely an underdog on the circuit. What are your sort of thoughts on the Hesketh Hunt days?
Well, it was all, I don't know how to say it really. I mean, it just sort of happened. They met in F3 and Bubbles was driving at the time. I think they realised Bubbles was no good. Dad just got sacked. And they met at the same time. Bubbles said, we're looking for a driver. Dad said, I'm looking for a seat. And then Bubbles went to Hesketh and said, I found you a driver. He's driving and I'll be the manager instead of the driver. And I think Hesketh said, okay. And it went from there. And I think they were doing all right in F3. So they said, all right, let's go up to F2. Then it was a disaster. And this is really the best bit I like. Alexander took the initiative and thought, well, if I'm going to fool around at the back, Formula 1 then it could have cost me 30% more. So if I'm going to fool around in the back, I might as well do it in the real thing. So they were crap at Formula 2, so they moved up to Formula 1. And it went on from there. They had a lot of fun. They partied hard, but I think behind the scenes, behind all of that, there was a lot of hard work going on. they were taking it very, very seriously. They really were. And they had hired chassis to begin with. Then when they built their own chassis, then that 308, it proved to be a very good car. And yeah, as you said, if Dad could have won more races in '75, I mean, the car was very quick. But they did also have a tyre advantage, I think. I think they were on Firestones and everyone else was on Bridgestones, and they didn't know they had an advantage, but there was a slight advantage with the tyres as well. Then when the Firestone pulled out, they were on a level playing field. But I mean, yeah, I mean, the way it happened, I mean, when Hesketh went into Formula One, he could have picked an existing driver, but he didn't. He decided to stick with Dad. I think they had a degree of loyalty for one another. Actually, I know they had a great deal of loyalty for one another. Dad actually turned down a Ferrari seat at the end of '74 to stay with Hesketh, and that was Nicky's seat. Nicky got the seat instead. Not many people know that. That was kept very quiet. But Dad did test a Ferrari, and because my uncle said he was very young. He remembers the conversation Dad was having with Grandma. Do I take the Ferrari seat or do I remain loyal to Alexander? And the answer was he stuck with Alexander rather than going to Ferrari.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I knew because
very few people did. I was looking for a Ferrari book while I was having a crap at a friend's house once, and I saw a picture of Ferrari, an early '70s Ferrari F1 car, and I saw black helmet with a tiny bit of, I could just see the bit of orange sticking out. I thought, hang on a minute, I recognise that helmet. So I rang Uncle Dave and asked him, and he said, yeah, that would have been Dad testing in '73 or '74. I think it was '74, I think it was.
That's amazing. And funny enough, Lord Hesketh told us a story about how Enzo Ferrari invited Alexander and the Hesketh team to Modena to, I think, said they were offering him some engines potentially for the Hesketh Formula One car. And apparently it was a bit of a cover to try and work out how the Heskeths were so quick and that the Ferraris couldn't get past them. And Lord Hesketh explained that it's all to do with they spent a lot of time in the wind tunnel developing the which is interesting. But apparently they almost all died. They were trying to land at the wrong airfield and almost hit a bit of Armco, which had been put up for a go-kart track. Again, it's not a story I've ever heard before, but just
no, I haven't heard that one either. I didn't know that. That doesn't surprise me. There's the sneaky Italians trying to do a dirty one, get some inside information. Doesn't surprise me at all.
And you obviously your father he retired from Formula One. He obviously won the championship 76, and then obviously racing McLaren. I think 77 was a bit tougher year, and I think he ended up in Wolf in, was it 78 or 79, and then he ended up, I think, retiring halfway through the season, and he obviously then ended up doing commentating, which he was, in my opinion, exceptionally good at. Did you ever get a sense of your father enjoyed the commentating more than the racing?
I wouldn't have thought more than the racing, but I know, as far as I'm aware, he did start to get into it and enjoy it a lot more. I think his first season or two, where Murray and he didn't see eye to eye, and then Dad started to sort of work harder at it and get his teeth into it, and at that time he formed a very strong friendship with Murray, and I think he started to enjoy it a lot more.
Yeah. It must be quite nice for you, obviously, having, when you were 18, son, you entered this world, and I guess there would have been pressure on you filling your father's legacy and so on. But also, it must be quite nice that so many of these amazing characters you mentioned about Murray Walker, and obviously some of the people that you've interviewed. I know you've interviewed Niki Lauda and Mika Hakkinen, Bernie Ecclestone, and Damon Hill, and so on. Having that connection to all those people that all hold your father in such high esteem must be quite a sort of nice feeling. All these people with a lot of respect for your father.
It certainly is, yeah. Speaking of guys like that, even just the people that didn't know Dad, that met him once or twice, the fans, I often, actually quite a lot, bump into you, meet someone, and said, "Oh, I met your father," and I hear it like a new little story each time, and it's really nice to hear. There was an awful lot of love for him, and it's very touching.
And out of those interviews you've done, you mentioned you've recently interviewed Jackie Stewart. Is there a favourite interviewee? I imagine you've done obviously Niki Lauda as well. Is there one person that really stands out?
I think the one I enjoyed the most was Mika Hakkinen. Dad was Mick's mentor. So I heard some lovely details there. And Mick actually, he more or less said that his world championship was thanks to my father. And again, that was it. It was due to his mental approach. I mean, he was putting too much pressure on himself, and Dad said, "Look, if you're not enjoying it, stop bloody doing it. So either go and race and enjoy yourself and relax and have fun, or stop racing." And he took the form and relaxed, and he delivered. And it wasn't just that about the interview that I liked. Mika was a very, very warm, very kind person, and he's just a really lovely guy. And so it was just really nice chatting with him.
Fantastic. And I know you've recently released a new blog about your father, and I read that your first article about the 1976 season with McLaren, when your father was obviously went on to win the World Championship. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that year. And I know you go into detail. You referred to it being like a snakes and ladders year for James, despite him ending up winning the championship.
Yeah, I mean, well, it was snakes and ladders. I mean, for a lot of the year, Dad didn't think he had hope in hell, but there was still a mathematical chance of it being possible. So Dad's approach was just to take one race at a time and see how it goes. I think maybe at the beginning of the year, he was probably quite excited. He got pole position in Argentina or Brazil, wherever the first race was. I think it was Argentina. But then retired. Then we got second place in South Africa. I think he would have had quite high hopes then, because he knew the car was good and the team was good. But it didn't turn out to go his way because of all the issues that happened during the season, the politics, disqualifications, the mechanical failures. When they had to change the I think it was the airbox. No, what did they have to change? They had to change something on the car, which was a very minor change to fit in with the rules, but it made the car completely undrivable. And so Dad was driving, a crap car for a couple of races. Yeah, I mean, I wonder, had it not gone that way, if Dad was, let's say Dad and Nicky's, let's say they didn't have all the politics, and Dad didn't have as many mechanical failures as he did, and he'd won the championship comfortably, then would have, there would have never been a movie made about it, and it wouldn't been one of the most exciting, seasons of the sport. So it all just happens for a reason, I suppose.
I guess one of the lovely sort of parts of the story is that obviously your father and Niki Lauda had the most unbelievable rivalry on track, but actually off track they were very good friends and got on incredibly well. I think your father, I'm sure, spent a lot of time winding Niki up, given his slightly different styles in racing and indeed life.
Yeah, they were great friends. A lovely story I had Niki say. It must have been the second or third last Grand Prix, where Niki could win it, that race. Anyway, early in the morning, I think when Dad was still in bed, or probably only just gone to bed, who knows. And they had adjoining rooms in the hotel. Niki marches in at 7 o'clock in the morning, fully in his race gear, and says, "Morning, today I win the World Championship," and walks out.
Excellent. I know that I think it's Matthias, Nicky's son, also races, and I believe that you've raced together or indeed against each other in the last few years. How do you guys compare? Is there any similarity between you and Matthias and your father and Niki in driving styles, or are you both very different?
I'm not sure, really.
Who's quicker?
I suppose Matthias was quicker most of the time. I had my sort of explosive moments when everything comes together, and the car setup's good, tires are good, because when we're racing together, those tires are quite inconsistent. One set you could be a second faster than another set. So when it all came together, I was quite, I was pretty competitive. But he was far more consistent, and under pressure as well. I didn't drive particularly well in that championship. It was the MRF championship. My head wasn't in the right place then. It's not my head wasn't then where it is now. Had it been that way around, I probably would have given him a better run for his money. But there was no sort of rivalry. We were driving for the same team, so we were teammates effectively.
Okay.
Where we were. And that's all we've done since then. I haven't raced against him since. It'd be fun. I always wanted to do a endurance race with him, as teammates in the same car. Maybe and Bruno Senna. I met Bruno a few times. He's a lovely chap. It would be fun, the three of us, Hunt, Senna and Lance, have a crack at 12 hours, something like that. It'd be great fun.
That would be great. I guess it's quite an interesting idea. You're looking back at history. There's so many of these fathers and sons passing on. You obviously mentioned a few of them there, but you've got Graham and Damon Hill, both Formula One world champions. Keke and Nico Rosberg, again, both Formula One world champions. Gilles and Jacques Villeneuve is another example. Obviously, Jacques won the championship, I believe, 1997. And then sadly, Gilles' career was obviously cut short in, I think, 82 at the Belgium GP. But again, you've got Brabham, Piquet, Fittipaldi, Andretti. There's so many of these families that seem to have the talent. And you're obviously another classic example of you've sort of got the talent, similar sort of talent to your father. Do you think it's genetic, or do you think it's mindset, or what is it that sort of passes down, do you think, these generations? Or is it the fact that you've got access at an early age?
I think there's got to be some genetics there, definitely.
Yeah.
Whether the offspring gets the necessary genes, because you can breed. You look at breeding anything else for a purpose, whether it's working dogs or race horses or whatever. You can have a colt that put the right colt and the right fillies together, but you're not necessarily going to get the best results always. But I do believe it is genetic. I think for the others, obviously, they grew up around it, not all of them, but growing up around it has been ingrained into you, and they obviously start early. I didn't have that. Like I said, I knew nothing about motorsport and I had absolutely no experience. But, I did show talent straight away. I believe years on a horse can give you an advantage. And I know that because when I've done instructing at Bedford Autodrome, people that have never been on a racetrack before, the ones that are professional horsemen, they were always naturally quicker straight away. So there is a connection between riding horses and driving cars. I think it's the feel through your bum, I suppose, something like that.
Definitely. Yeah. It's funny you say that, actually, because we interviewed Gillian, she was Fortescue Thomas when she was racing in the 70s, and she was a famous event rider, and also obviously Sterling Moss. He did a lot of show jumping before he got into racing, and I guess it's a case of balance, feel. You with a horse, you very much got to feel what the horse is doing, and then in a car, particularly a race car, you really got to feel what's happening and where the movement is and the balance of the car. So I completely agree with you. I've done point-to-pointing and a lot of riding in my whole youth, and I think it definitely helped me when I got into racing when I was sort of 17, 18, and certainly go-karting when I was 12. And interesting overlap. And obviously, coming to a question around the dreaded coronavirus, obviously it's disrupted all racing pretty much around the whole world, I imagine. And I imagine it's disrupted your season pretty heavily. I did see that you were doing recently some esports online. Do you think that, I know that esports obviously got the most enormous following, but do you think it will become more mainstream with traditional motorsports fans maybe after this period and sort of going forward?
I haven't thought about it yet, but I suppose it's certainly got the potential to. I don't see why not. I mean, the racing it's very real. I mean, when I say very real, it's very realistic. So I don't see why not. That it could become more popular, more mainstream, particularly as the environment that we live in is calling for. Well, you know what I'm saying. It's calling for a reduction in. Well, we need to reduce our emissions, and I don't know. I don't want to project. It's very difficult to project at this time for anyone. But hopefully, we learn from this pandemic. The ecosystem has had the best year it's had in decades, probably centuries, and that's due to people not moving around so much. So if people can race from home, then it is good for not so much fun for the fans, but or the drivers, but it is a lot better for other things. And there's other things. As boring as some people think they are, it's very important. Our survival depends on it.
Yeah. I know you're very passionate about the sort of green side of these things, and I believe that you were a sustainability spokesman for Formula E.
It's as simple as this. It's a passion for sustaining our own race, and I believe it's our duty, it's our obligation, it's our I think of a stronger word than duty. It is. It's absolutely. It's on us. We can wipe out the human species if we choose to. If we choose to ignore the signs, or if we act, then we can actually continue our evolution. And develop as a race rather than demise, which is what we're doing.
Yeah.
So people think I'm maybe think I'm a hardcore environmentalist. I'm more of a, I don't know what the word is, but it's more for the people, because we need the environment to survive on. We need the ecosystem, and without that, we're buggers. It just seems silly that, hundreds of thousands, millions of years that we've been in existence with this planet, and then in a blink of an eye, we come along and wipe everything out, which is exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting how these things evolve. Last time I was at Le Mans, there's all the diesels obviously winning the races with the Audis and so on. Now that's completely changed. Diesels out the window, back to obviously electric, hybrid. It's great to see the evolution, and I think people that dismiss hybrid electric racing as maybe being not as exciting, again, it will evolve. It'll become more exciting. I guess that's the sort of nature of evolution. Things will progress in an interesting way. So no, I agree with you there. And I guess I'm conscious of your time. One last sort of long question, and we've got a few quick fire questions. It's just around obviously the film Rush. It was directed by Ron Howard. I know that you and your brother and your mother, I think, attended the premiere a few years ago. Did you find it strange seeing your father played by Chris Hemsworth, and do you think the film did justice to the whole story?
I'll firstly say they did a fine job. They did it. It was a good movie. People enjoyed it. So yeah, it was very good in that respect. I do think they could have done a hell of a lot better. Of course, I'm going to be quite critical. But unfortunately, Hemsworth wasn't the right man for the job at all. I think I'm not the only one that can see this. He portrayed my father as quite sort of cocky and arrogant and sort of careless. And Dad wasn't that at all. Dad was quite the opposite of that. He was innocent, very careful, and cautious. Although to the untrained eye, he came across just as a party playboy, but there was so much more to him than that. And then the contrast of Daniel Brawl playing an absolute masterpiece of Nicky Lauda. I think he made Hemsworth look like an amateur. In my opinion, I think Daniel Brawl is up there with the best actors. I don't know much about the industry, but from what I've seen, he's got to be up there in the top 10 for me. And they tweaked a few of the details around in the season, which they didn't need to do. When I asked Ron Howard about this, he said, well, because the truth was too awesome, people wouldn't believe it. I mean, he could have thought of a better excuse than that. There's most load of crap I've ever had in my life. The truth is, I think he couldn't resist, personalizing a little bit for his own ego, I suppose. But he should have just stuck to the truth. It was a better story.
Yeah. Well, I think you were slightly more polite than Lord Hesketh was in our last interview, but you'll have to listen to his rather less.
I've heard some of his opinions, and he was right. I've seen the photographs. He said in the movie the women were fucking ugly, and they were much better looking in reality. I think he's right. He's right on that one.
That's one of the things, the bits of feedback we had in the interview, but I'm not sure I can repeat his exact wording about the film because it'll have to be beeped out, I think. But there we go.
Yeah.
So just to end on, we've got some quick fire questions. So, favorite car ever raced?
LMP3.
Yep. Which one was it? I can't remember which you were racing.
The Ligier, obviously the last Ligier, they bought out 2021, but the last one bought out the Ligier. I think it's got a Nissan 5-litre engine. I raced that at Road to Le Mans, and that's the same car I raced in Estoril in the that 6-hour VDV race. They're bloody brilliant cars. They really are the prototypes. I love them. I mean, compared to a GC, it's chalk and cheese. It's like driving a GC after one of those, like driving a bus.
Amazing. And I think I know the answer to this, but favourite circuit?
Le Mans. But Virginia Raceway, I've only driven in a GT. It might be too bumpy in a real racing car, the prototype, but Virginia Raceway is bloody great. Really enjoyed that. Did that in the Maserati GT4. Silverstone obviously has got to be up there, but Kota, that I enjoyed that as well. But yeah, Le Mans got to be the number one, I think.
That makes sense. And given your father's interest in budgerigars, do you have any other unusual interests outside of motorsport?
I've got a hell of a lot of unusual interests outside of motorsport, mate. Relative to Dad's budgerigars, I keep chickens. I don't at the moment. My last lot got nailed by the fox. So when I do get my own house and I build another run, I'll get another lot. Another flock, that's the word I'm looking for. And I had an ornamental pheasant as well, who was hand raised. Unfortunately, he got chomped by the fox as well. It was my fault for not double checking or triple checking the enclosure. The fox got in. That does happen. But what other interests? I mean, as you know, the countryside and conservation is my main passion, and it's a bit of a sort of life mission of mine, trying to figure out what can be done about it. We need help, really. We do. And where that's going to come from, I'm not entirely sure. Well, I've got a rough idea, but I'm not going to say that idea because people think I'm nuts.
There we go. And what about, I know your father played a lot of squash and tennis. Have you inherited that bug?
Tennis, I'm hopeless. Squash, I enjoy. I'm not nowhere near Dad's standard. I mean, from 0 to 10, I'm probably 10 being world class, and 0 complete beginner. I might be a 3. But I do enjoy a good game of squash. It's good exercise, and tennis, I'm pretty hopeless. So I enjoy knock around every now and again, but Dad was quite keen on his golf. My brother plays a lot. Again, I enjoy it. I enjoy a knock around. Golf, when it's going well, when you're striking the ball well, it's a lovely feeling. But when it's not going well, it's a bastard of a sport.
I couldn't agree more. And last question: one car, money, no object. What would it be?
Well, assuming I had my other practical cars just as a fun toy, would probably be a McLaren P1, I suppose, or maybe a Lamborghini. But because Dad raced in McLaren, I think the P1. I've driven the GCR, which I'd probably have to be the P1. But if it was only one car I could have, then it would have to be an RS6, which has been tuned by apt, because that's practical. I can get the dogs in the car, and it's not practical driving a McLaren P1 around everywhere.
There we go. Well, thank you so much. The great answers. I wouldn't mind a P1 or indeed an RS6. So I agree on the last question as well. Well, thank you so much for your time, Freddie. That's been very interesting. And I guess some of our listeners might want to know, and readers might want to know, when are they likely to see you next on track? Given if coronavirus allows, do you think
their guess is as good as mine. I really don't know. So unfortunately, Texaco have had to pull out from the Le Mans race, which is understandable. I'm sure they've taken. I think all companies have taken the biggest hit, financially, than anything else, which is good news in many ways, but not for me racing. It's when I next get invited to drive at the moment. So
there we go.
That's it.
There's always a seat in my Cobra if you get desperate. So there we go.
It'll be fun. Yeah, you send me the picture of it. It looks really cool. I'd love if you're racing and you need a co-driver. I'd be glad to do it.
Fantastic. That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Freddie. And that was really interesting. And hopefully speak soon.
Great. Thanks a lot, mate. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.